Good evening and welcome to the second program in our Values and Conflict series. My name is Eliza Abrams-Koenig, and I am the Director of Student Leadership here at Yeshiva University. Thank you. That's my fan club, and I appreciate them being here. The Sacks-Herenstein Center is dedicated to perpetuating the memory of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks through teaching his scholarship and Torah, developing programs focused on values, cultivating leaders, and creating meaningful impact opportunities. I very much did not have an ideal dating experience. I wasn't set up often and was very much consumed by the pressure to date starting during my senior year at Stern. The dates I did go on were kind of schwer, to say the least, and by the time I graduated Stern, I already had a number of friends married and one of them even expecting their first child. I spent the next 10 years living in Washington Heights, and despite very much wanting to get married, I did not. I had the best time of my life, though. I built my career, I received my master's degree, I became good friends with my friend Rachel Hercman, and I traveled. I made friends for life. At 31, I met and married my husband. Being set up regularly and marrying young is a bracha. And also, doesn't happen to everybody. And it can create unnecessary stress and pressure. Tonight, we will learn about the benefits of marrying young and also the benefits of waiting. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. Tonight's program is moderated by our very own Dr. Erica Brown. Dr. Brown is the Vice Provost for Values and Leadership and the Director of the Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks-Herenstein Center. Our incredible panelists include I'm going to go in order of how they're sitting. Rachel Hercman, LCSW, is a psychotherapist specializing in relationships, sexual intimacy, and trauma. She maintains a private practice in Manhattan and serves as a consultant for clergy, educators, and therapists. Rabbi Dovid Bashevkin is the Director of Education for NCSY and the Clinical Assistant Professor of Jewish Values at the Cy Sims School of Business at Yeshiva University. He has published 4 books and is the host and founder of 1840. I did not think that was going to get the laugh. Okay. Rabbi Moshe Tzvi Weinberg. Give a round of applause. Did you give one to Rachel? I don't think you gave one to Rachel. Thank you. Okay. Rabbi Moshe Tzvi Weinberg teaches here at Yeshiva University in the Irving I. Stone Beit Midrash program, SBMP, where he also serves as Mashgiach Ruchani. Rabbi Weinberg also teaches in Stern College, Heichal HaTorah, MTA, and Na'aleh. He currently serves as the Mashpia for Congregation Beth Abraham in Bergenfield. It is my privilege to hand the floor to Dr. Brown.
Good evening. All right, we'll use this mic. It's a real privilege and honor to be with you tonight, to have a conversation you've all been waiting for. And perhaps you've not been waiting for this conversation, but it's going to happen anyway. And in order to dignify and honor the time that each of our panelists is putting into this evening, I'd ask you all to silence your phones, please, and make sure that there are no notifications so that we can just really be in this space together. So my first question for our esteemed panelists is, how often are you asked to give advice about dating or relationships? We'll start with you, Rabbi Moshe Tzvi.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. Just to answer the question very matter-of-factly, I would say that I speak to students both here in YU and in Stern College probably on I don't want to say daily basis, but certainly many times a week. Students are seeking advice about a relationship that they're in, seeking advice whether or not they're ready to start a relationship. And I think just by way of introduction to this whole evening, I hope I'm not being presumptuous, but I imagine that everyone here on the panel would agree that we're very excited about those conversations. Our doors are open. There are many, many wonderful people on our campuses who want to have those conversations with you. And you should never be afraid to engage in that conversation, to begin that conversation, to start exploring what does it mean to be ready to date? Am I ready to date? How is this relationship going? There's nothing really to be lost by having a broader perspective. But again, just to answer the question, certainly on a daily or multiple times a week having conversations about relationships?
I have probably similar, like daily or at least weekly. People don't usually ask me. I'm not the first line of defense. I'm more like the SEAL Team 6. That there's like a lot of other things that have gone wrong or variables that other people can't account for, then people will often bring me in. I rarely, for some reason, get like, hey, I'm just starting to date, could we talk? But I have a lot of more in-depth, farther along conversations.
So I'll start sending those people to you who want to open that conversation. So as a psychotherapist, I have this conversation on a regular basis in a formal way. In other words, people in therapy who are currently dating or engaged or married or just still kind of in this parsha, as we would say, but also I find informally, when I go to shul, when I go to weddings, when I go to, even if I'm standing online at the supermarket, I find that because it's something that is on a lot of people's minds, I've actually had to create boundaries for myself of trying to have some moderation about how often I'm having this conversation because it's constant on people's minds.
And I'm glad you said that, Rachel. I guess it leads me to my next question about the whole process of advice giving. Is there a certain age where you say, oh, it says in Pirkei Avot, Chamishim le'etzah, right? But we have a young panelist here. Is you feel there's a weight of giving advice, and what happens when you give the wrong advice? What happens when, which I imagine, may happen on occasion. Lying in bed thinking about, have I overstepped the mark, or someone really do I know this person well enough? So can you speak a little bit in general, not only about this, but when you take the life of someone's very serious questions, and the context of their lives, do you feel sometimes burdened by that? And we'll start with you, Rachel.
Sure. So I find that culturally, because we have this concept of going to a Rav or going to a posek, we have a construct of you go to this wise person and you say, should I do X or Y? And they tell you do Y, and then you go do that.
Or not.
Or not. Or you go rabbi shopping and find someone who will tell you what you want to hear. But I find where it gets tricky is that with relationships and dating, I find there are people who give advice who will be very directive and will say, do this, and feel very strong about it. For me, personally, as a therapist, I definitely err on the side of let's kind of lay this out, give some language to what's going on here, help you come to a place of maybe intuition. Because I find for a lot of people, they're told in the dating world, go with your gut. But if that's not a value for children as they're growing up, meaning our kids told in elementary school the value of going with your gut, I'm not sure. So for a lot of people, it gets kind of confusing. All of a sudden, you're supposed to get to the dating world and know what your gut even feels like. And a lot of Ashkenazim have gut issues anyway. So it's like, oh, this is our first time visiting our gut. So long answer to your question, for me, it is something I'm very conservative about. I would find in cases of abuse, I tend to be more directive and will say, this sounds like, you're listing all these things, all these patterns. Can we talk about this very directly? Because I find when people are in an abusive relationship, it is harder for them to have access to certain intuition. But I feel like I'm talking for a long time, so I'm going to pass the mic in a second. But it is something that I think anyone who's in a helping profession of giving advice, it bothers me when I hear stories of people who were unsure if they should marry someone, and they went to go ask a Rav or a therapist or a Madjucha from seminary from 10 years ago, were told with confidence that they should go through with it. It didn't work out. And then whose fault is that, right? Because we're also making our own decisions. So I'll pass it to you.
There's so much that resonated with me in that story. In one of my most formative years, somebody extraordinarily close to me, and I'm not going to say their name, you come to me after, and I've probably mentioned this in my class, somebody extraordinarily close to me had a broken engagement. And it was a broken engagement that, any time there's a broken engagement, it captures the fascination of our very teeny tiny community. Whispers what was going on, did they know? Because it's such a mystery. Commitment is such a mystery that once you make it, you feel like you always had it, and before you do it, it feels like, how will I ever find it? And this person who was extraordinarily close to me, who broke off an engagement, mind you, 10 days before the wedding, there were phone calls that were received the night of the wedding. Am I at the right wedding hall? No, you're not. I mean, you are technically, but it's not the right wedding hall. There's no wedding tonight. And what I saw in this process was bad advice at its highest realization. Bad advice from people who are holy people, who are well-intentioned people, who are understandable people. The difficulty of giving advice, particularly when it comes to dating, is something that Rachel mentioned, but I just want to highlight. It's a two-pronged issue of learning how to trust, instead of your gut, I would say your intuition, learning how to deal with your intuition, but also realizing it's not learning how to trust your intuition, it's learning how to discover your intuition. Because for most people, particularly when it comes to commitment, we are all extraordinarily unreliable narrators. We don't really know what our intuitions are. We could feel very strongly, as I did in periods of my life, with my current wife, saying there is no chance that I can marry this person. I was convinced of it. That was my intuition.
This is on video.
Yeah, I understand. Okay. She knows. She knows. We love you, Toph. She knows that, and I was convinced of what my intuition was. So much of the difficulty is realizing that you can be an unreliable narrator of your own happiness. You can be an unreliable narrator of what clarity is in passing. Oh, I think I know for sure now, and then like, boom, it's gone, it's vanished. And learning how to discover and nurture intuition so it becomes a stable force in your life, not something that's going up and down in every other direction between the morning and the evening, is something that can take a quite a bit of time, dare I say a lifetime to do, and has much broader implications than just dating, which is why I think tonight's conversation is so important.
Yeah, thank you. Rabbi Moshe Tzvi?
Sure, I'll just add, working microphone. I'll just add, going back to your original comment about, the age range that Chazal spell out for when it's the appropriate time to do things, we have to understand, and some of our wisest rabbis have ruled this way. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, for example, would tell people that when the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says 18 is the right time to marry, maybe, in answer to our question tonight, now or later, maybe that's the right time. He said that maybe in our generation, 18 is 24, and that I don't think was a hard number either. So, the responsibility of you to even seek a Maimer Chazal, to read a Mishnah and to interpret it in a way that resounds with your life experience is very important, and I think there's a lot of room for that. And in terms of what Rachel mentioned earlier, I've pushed very hard back against rabbinic figures and individuals who give that heavy-handed advice, and sometimes it is so out of line. And the first thing I'll say to anyone who walks into my office seeking my advice about marriage or dating or any aspect of a relationship, my first question is always, what do you think? Because before you try to outsource your life to me, and I'll never take that on my shoulders, you have to own your choices. My first thought is, well, what do you think? And if you haven't thought about it, if you haven't formulated your own opinion, then maybe do that first, and then we'll discuss it. So the real responsibility at the end of the day rests on your shoulders. It's healthy. It's important to seek advice of others, but be prepared to own the choices that you're going to make.
Yeah, you can't outsource the blame either when you feel that there's a mistake. So let's talk about the dating climate here at YU. Would you say this has become a distraction to self-development and to learning?
You're looking at me, so I'll try
to
answer it. It can be. It certainly can be. I see people living with an incredible amount of pressure to get married, to get it over with almost, which is such a strange way to describe such a joyous, wondrous period of one's life. We'll try without this as well. To try to just wrap it up so that I can not have to worry about and live with the anxiety of the what if. Like, what if it's not this year? What if it's not next year? What if it's not in the next 5 years? And unfortunately, you end up being neither here nor there because you're trying to be somewhere where you're not yet, and you're also missing out on the opportunity that you have in front of you. So, I would caution a person to fall into that trap. We all, again, we have the social pressures, the societal pressures, our local pressures. My roommate got engaged, or my best friend is getting married, and often that, that blinds a person to think that now that it has to be the time. Now has to be the time. All my friends, right? And we always, again, we over-exaggerate. All my friends. Is it really all your friends, or maybe like a couple of your friends? But unfortunately, that robs a person of the opportunity to be where you are. And these years are precious. I can't tell you how often I hear from alumni, I didn't appreciate what YU was when I was here. I didn't appreciate what Stern was. If I could just go back, there's so many things I would do again. And that's all of life. We all have that at every stage and phase of life. But appreciate the opportunity you have to grow here, to develop yourself, to become a more wholesome self before you try to bring other people into your life.
Okay. Dovid?
I went through a 3-pronged stage in my 20s. The first stage was, I wonder when real life is going to start. And the second stage was, shouldn't real life have started already by now? And the third stage was like, expletive, comma, I think real life has already started. I think this is it. I think this is the life. I have a visceral reaction to somebody who is framing dating as a cost benefit to their quality of learning that I need to call out as being the highest level of loser kite that I could ever imagine, of just the indication of somebody who is not ever going to accomplish anything in any area of learning, is somebody who's trying to like mitigate like the amount of distraction that they have. Loving what you do and loving what you're involved in is a part of becoming successful in any area. And I started my ongoing learning project, which I organize all my notes alphabetically. I thank God I have over 600 pages of notes with subcategories. I began that the moment, I remember on a Friday before my first date. And I started it because I realized that...
Some of you may be behind already.
No, the Friday before I started my first date, I realized that I needed something that I was going to love doing to take me through a period where I'm not going to have, for the Men Yeshiva University, they have so I was there with a 3-hour morning Seder, and it's easy. You could squeeze out, 25 minutes of productivity from that. But most of life is going to be squeezing out 25 minutes of productivity from a half hour. And learning how to do that, life, that's called life. And if you want to start real life, it is not like, oh man, it's affecting my learning. Like, that is something unhealthy about that. There's something off about that. This is part of what life entails. This is part of and learning how to love and enjoy and thrive in all of the different components of your life, and not looking at each component as infringing or undermining, is going to help you be a healthy person. You don't want to be the parent who every time their child reaches out to them, you're like, I could be learning right now. Like, like that. It sends a curl up my spine to be that kind of person. And I think calling that out very clearly and very obviously, because it isn't always so obvious, just needs to be said.
So can I just hyper focus on that for a second? This makes my skin crawl. Yeah. But if someone says learning is a real priority for me right now, and I have to be judicious about my time, what's problematic about that for you?
Oh, there's nothing problematic about that. That means that they shouldn't be dating right now.
Okay.
They should not be dating at all right now. Zero dating. So Ben Azai delayed dating for many, many, many years. I mean, there are people who delay dating for, not... Okay, that's a separate choice. But to look at an obligation that you are ready for, and just every minute you're there, you're looking at your watch, you're like, I could be in a Pnei Yehoshua right now. That's just, I don't think that's a healthy way to engage with life. It's not a healthy way to engage with the Pnei Yehoshua. Meaning, it's just, if every obligation in your life is undermining a different obligation, it just doesn't feel like a whole person. It feels like a very fractured sense of self, where you're negotiating your obligations in your life with the same way of like the yeshiva guy who looks at the schedule, is like, when am I going to have time to finish Tanakh? And like, eventually you don't. So like, spoiler alert. But like I don't know, like it really, if you're not ready for multiple obligations in your life, then you're not ready, and then you got to push that off.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Rachel, but I would like to ask if you can refrain from sidebar conversations so that we can hear our speakers fully and completely. Rachel.
So I'm going to bring an angle as a mental health professional because I think that the college years are a very significant and vulnerable and impactful time when it comes to mental health. I think that there are some people that when they get to college, this is actually the first time where there's an opportunity for them to really start to like have some stability. I think the adolescent years can be very kind of tumultuous. I think if someone goes to, Israel for a year or two, seminary, yeshiva, even though everyone says, oh, it's amazing, it's often a rocky time in terms of figuring out who you are. Identity and relationships are very intertwined because I think that we need to know who we are to engage in romantic relationships, but it's through being in relationships that we often learn more about who we are. We could think we know ourselves and we could think, oh yeah, I'm not so opinionated, I'm all chill, but then people get engaged and all of a sudden, Mr. or Mrs. I'm not opinionated realizes they actually have a lot of opinions about, let's say, certain things for the wedding. So I do want to say that the pressure to start dating sometimes takes away from an opportunity. If someone's been through a lot in their life and they've been through some trauma, and it doesn't have to be what we would say capital T trauma. Maybe they grew up in a home where they saw certain models of marriage that they do not want to replicate in their own home. College could be a great time to maybe go to therapy and explore that before finding a partner, right? I'm not saying that this work can't be done after marriage, but I will say as a therapist, I do find in the Orthodox world, when I'm working with a couple, it's more likely that neither of them have been to individual therapy at all. And it makes a very big difference when you get married and you have not done any of that kind of work that may need to be done for your specific situation. So I think there's something very mature and healthy about someone saying, you know what, this right now is not the time for me to pick a life partner. But I think we also as a community need to respect that because I find that there are times where people will take a break from dating and people are on their back. What do you mean? Come on, this is like, this person is your bashert. I know it, you gotta scoop it up. And we don't give people that kind of space or that confidence that if you feel like this is not a good time for you, okay. The other thing I want to mention that I think is a very real pressure, I mean, I didn't go to Stern, I went to Queens College and then Wurzweiler. And I think for me it was very helpful that I have a lot of friends who went to Stern, I went to MMY, so that was my chevra, but I was not in Stern. I was not seeing decorated doors when someone got engaged. And not being in, do they still do that? Okay, I'm like, maybe they don't do that anymore. I'm dating myself, they stopped. So that pressure, I think, is very significant, and it's not just an insecurity. And I think for men who are learning, I do want to also mention the pressures of being in smicha and not having a wife and what that means for jobs and being interviewed by shuls. It's a very real challenge. So I think that the pressure that people feel, it's not all in their head, but I also think we have to be playing the long game here in terms of, are we viewing finding a partner as just like, okay, I got to get this over with, or kind of taking a step back and being like, wait a second, there's getting married and there's being married, like actually being married to this person. And I know we can't understand like time and looking to the future, but there's so much focus on the kind of fanfare that you're a celebrity when you get engaged, and like we shriek at wedding. Like me, I was once at a wedding where I was sitting at a table with some of the friends who were from a secular college who had never been to an Orthodox wedding before, and they thought someone got hurt on the dance floor because all the girls were shrieking, and we're like, no, this is just what we do. Like, we shriek. Like, we were 19. People weren't shrieking as much when we were 25, but anyway.
No, there's shrieking. There's still the Stern shriek.
So, it's complicated, but I think even just trusting people that if someone's like not sure or wants to take time, or it doesn't have to be this like, well, why aren't you dating? Or all your friends are starting on May 1st. What's happening on May 1st? That all of a sudden everyone's waking up that morning and they're mature enough to date. Like, is there something changing in the water? So this thing that we have to do everything but as a cohort, and that kind of, I'm going to be the one left behind. That's, I think, part of the challenge here is you have your chevra, but it also means being able to slow down and say, where am I at? Like, is this even what I want? Or am I just going through the motions because that's what everyone's talking about?
Yeah, so I want to share a documentary that I watched. I believe it was called 112 Videos. And it was a wedding photographer who decided to go back after 5 and 10 years to people whose weddings he videoed. And he interviewed a lot of clergy who officiate at weddings, including rabbis. And what the sort of dominant sentiment was, we spent so much time investing in the details and particulars of the wedding and not the marriage. And so I always recommend that people watch that. It's sobering. There were people who were in very healthy, functioning relationships that were vital, but there were also those who had divorced or separated and really sort of struggling because they really didn't prepare themselves. So I want to go to crazy, if that's okay. In some segments of the yeshiva world, men in particular are advised not to date until they're 23. So imagine for a second that we had a new policy at Yeshiva University that you could not date or get married during your undergraduate years. What do you think would be different for people socially, intellectually, emotionally?
We wouldn't have this event.
Right, we wouldn't have this event. That's true. That's true. We wouldn't need this event. We'd have other occasions to talk. Because if you've read the signage outside, and I'm not talking about Sarachek, if you've read the signage, we think a lot about our core values. And Torat Adam, the development of the self, is surely central to what most people go to college for. So what do you think would be different for our students? I'm going to start with you, Reb Dovid.
The first thing that people would have to get used to is the notion that their college or yeshiva is taking a set policy regarding their dating life. Most people in the modern Orthodox community look at Yeshiva University and it would feel very strange for them. Even showing up to these kind of events is like, is it going to be like the Frum kind of dating panel or more like the Krum boy kind of dating panel? Like, what's the situation? And everybody has their own private, like they're looking around, like it's like a BMP dating panel. I guess this is okay. I could be here.
Right.
Just like in
By the
middle.
way, we did have a number of students who we got feedback
Of course.
that people didn't feel comfortable coming.
Of course.
They all wanted to hear you. They just didn't want to be in the room.
Of course. So the first thing that they have to get comfortable with is the knowledge that actually in the yeshiva world, to their credit, their first responsibility when you come into yeshiva is they take a picture of you and they get your basic, like where are you from, and it goes into a dating database. Now people might look at that as very cold and very harsh. I did not end up getting married through that system. I think that system is phenomenal because it at least improves and makes sure that nobody gets lost in the cracks. And I've heard from many, many people that we are in between two different worlds. We're between, we look to the yeshiva world as being this antiquated, very, shadchanim, wearing babushkas, coming in and reading, tarot cards. And on the flip side, we're not there. And we're also not in this, secular individualistic world where we're on apps and we're picking up people at bars. So we think we're kind of trying to take both of both worlds. A lot of people get lost in that world. And if our institutions took more responsibility in dating, for dating, I actually think it would be somewhat healthy. I think there's a lot that YU could contribute. I've mentioned this explicitly. There was one semester where I was teaching on the Stern campus and on the YU campus, and I felt like I was sitting on a absolute treasure trove of information. I'm like, let's go. Let's start events. A JPP Shidduch initiative. Let's do it. And I just didn't have capacity. But I think there's something very nice and organic that could come out from that. If people didn't get married until they were 23, I happen to believe that there are different ages for men or women. I like that you cannot get married within a year of coming back from Eretz Yisrael, at least. I would put it for guys 3 years. I don't think it's a specific age, but you need to be acclimated on a specific path before you get married. I don't like a number, but I like acclimating and aligning yourself with the future and feeling like you have some foggy notion of where this is headed. I think I've seen it much more with women than with men. Women, I've seen it over and over again. I'm not a blanket rule, who have started dating far too early and have sabotaged relationships that otherwise could have been very healthy for concerns that only exist in certain pockets of Ramat Eshkol, but they don't really exist in America.
Okay. Thank you. Rabbi Moshe Tzvi.
That was brilliant, Dovid. I'll piggyback off that last point. People need time to arrive within themselves. And that's, I couldn't agree more with that last point. When someone comes back, and the pushback is the following, and I'm curious to hear from other panelists what they think about this, but the pushback is often, well, I have this incredible clarity coming back from a year or two of studying in Israel, and it's kind of like there's this downward trajectory that I'm heading in, so if I can kind of lock in my values right now, then I'll be safe, and then I know who I am, and before things start to unravel. And maybe it's the very opposite. Maybe let it unravel a little bit and see where you actually are. See which of your values are actually your values versus what you're parroting from Rebbeim or teachers or Madrichim or Madrichot from yeshiva. Again, going back to the model of being married versus getting married. I mean, my wife always tells this story, and it's gut-wrenching when she tells this story when she was in Stern about a roommate, a friend of hers who was considering getting married and was getting pretty close, and she was back and forth and was very unsure. And that night where she came to the decision that she's getting married, she announced to her roommate, we're getting married. And she started to sing, Oh, Od Yeshama. And one of the other roommates said, that's not getting married, that's a wedding. And it lasts for 6 hours. So we have to really remind ourselves that, again, if the values are going to fall apart, if this clarity that you have coming back from Eretz Yisrael, and there is a certain clarity, I'm not mocking it, God forbid, but if that's all going to unravel, if that's not going to be able to last for a couple of years, then it's probably something you haven't really acquired, and it's probably, again, like Rav Dovid was saying, it's time for a person to settle into their own skin, process some of those values, like the famous Maimer Chazal. Moshe Rabbeinu is hearing a lot of information from Hashem, but then the Torah has those pauses, those breaks, where even Moshe needs time to process. And you need that time in a healthy way to process and to really to make it your own.
So I want to say something that might sound like a stereotype, but I want to be clear, this is not all teachers in Israel. But I find that there's a dynamic that develops sometimes in seminary or yeshiva where kids come back from Israel kind of pitted against their parents a little bit. Maybe the Rebbeim or the teachers were pushing them to stay on a bed, and the parents were like, no. And I think that sometimes kids come back from Israel with a certain animosity towards their parents, or this tension of kind of what their parents want them to do and what the Rebbeim or teachers are telling them to do. And what I find ends up happening sometimes is that it then, for some kids, it postles any advice their parents give them. And just because parents may not be exactly in the same religious kind of lingo as their 19-year-old does not mean that they don't have wisdom about what may or may not be a good fit for their child. And I think there's this thing sometimes of people turning more to their friends for advice who are 5 minutes older than them, and they're going to take life advice, or this guy who's married for 6 weeks and now he's giving, he's telling everyone how to be married. It's like, would you take marathon advice from someone at mile 1 right now who's never run a marathon before? Probably not. I mean, you could, but it's kind of risky. So I think I just want to mention that piece too of and I get it. College time is a time where you're figuring out who you are, separate from your parents, but it can't just be in defiance of your parents. And sometimes the dating stuff, it comes up in this realm too, where the parents are automatically the bad guys if they're against an idea, or the parents are living vicariously through their child and pushing a specific idea. So I think even that piece, and again, I'm not saying all Rebbeim in Israel do this or all teachers in Israel do this, but there is sometimes this subtle kind of, your parents back in America aren't keeping these chomras, or, so therefore, you guys know better than them, which, parents, they're not necessarily totally out to lunch about what is best for their kids.
Yeah. Thank
Can
you.
I make one point
Sure.
about parents?
Well, actually, I'm going to ask you a question
oh.
about parents.
Yeah.
So
Please.
can we,
Yeah,
can we
yeah,
get that? But I do want to say on this point of what if we didn't have a culture of so much pressure around dating, and we really cared more about or emphasized more the social, intellectual, emotional, and religious development during the university years, which is why I think many other students in other colleges go to college, to make new friends as opposed to keeping within the friend group. If everyone in this room were to just consider who you were on this day 1 year ago, and how much you have evolved and developed as a human being, and then say, I could do that next year, and I could do that next year. At some point, someone joins you in that evolution and development, but sometimes that's such a leap, and sometimes we deny ourselves that leap because we start hyper-focusing on the other as opposed to the self. So I want to get to the parents' role in the development of the self of a college-age student, particularly on this. We have a lot of students who do not ask their parents for dating advice or marriage advice, and yet their decisions about dating and marriage may have strong financial repercussions on parents. The Shana Rishona, and I want to go learn in Grus, and I want to do this, and I want to do that, and someone else is paying the bill, but I forgot to bring you along in the journey. So talk to us a little bit about parents. Reb Dovid, if you want to start us off.
So what I've noticed is actually in contrast to what Rachel mentioned, which is that there is it's something so beautiful when I see it, and I see it very frequently, is that we have a generation, and this for sure is probably hyper accentuated in the tri-state area, of incredible wealth. We have a lot of wonderful families, and people don't want the mystery and the doubt and all of the concerns that descend after you get married. They almost want to continue living in their parents' house because marriage is a raw deal, because you are introducing so much more variability into your life, financially, where we're going to live, am I going to have the good life that I was brought up with, that people become so coddled by the lifestyle they were brought up with, where they're unable to almost accept in open arms, not the getting married, but the being married part, to come back again to what Rachel started. And being married, when you are 21 years old, you're not living in some, gorgeous home in Bergenfield with like a good, Natilsia Dimes section in your dining room that I keep on bringing that up because I fantasize about it. I don't yet have one, and it weighs on me. And you don't, it does. And you don't have that good home that you imagine what getting married is going to get you, because now you're being married and now you're in a 2-bedroom. They didn't get you the place in a 405 that costs $11,000 a month. They got you the part where you didn't want to be, and it's a 1-bedroom. This is madness. This isn't geschmack. So you go home every single Shabbos for Shabbos. Shabbos begins, mind you, Wednesday night. You stay till Monday night. So you're essentially in your apartment in Teaneck for like 36 hours a week, because you don't like it there. You're not ready to be married. I see this constantly. A part of the difficulty in this is that the gifts that we have from our parents, the financial gifts, we are not yet ready to step out onto our own and make a way for ourselves. So most people are downgrading in their lifestyle in early marriage rather than upgrading for a lot of previous generations of having a life of your own. I think there are 2 major important things to combat that. Number one, and I've mentioned this over and over again, any student who's been in any of my classes knows this, you have to start taking financial responsibility for your life early. You don't have to get married young. You have to take basic financial responsibility for your life when you are young. Start opening up a bank account. You should be able to have investment accounts. You should know the very basics of investment, because your most valuable asset is, my talmidim, time. And if you put away money at this age, you can actually have a nest egg to have the lifestyle of your dreams with the Natilsia Dime station in the dining room when you're in your 30s. But people don't do that. They're not ready to make a lot of those decisions, and our early financial education is terrible. And people people should be getting more jobs. This is a great time to work. That's number one. And number two is the religious issues that come out from this, where a lot of people want religiously the lifestyle that they grew up with. But all they know is what their parents were like religiously in their 40s maybe, or maybe late 30s or mid 50s. So, let's say women will grow up and they want somebody minyan 3 times a day. That's what I grew up with what my father was like. And they'll freak out. I heard he missed the minyan. He missed the mincha. I heard he came through the grapevine. And I'll say, you're not trying to marry a 45-year-old like your father is now. What was your father like when he was 22? It was a different story. It was a different thing. And vice versa. A lot of time with guys, they're dating a woman. They're thinking about their older sisters. They're thinking about what their mother was like and the religious affect of their parents. They don't know what their parents were like when they were 21, 22 years old. They didn't come out of the womb that way. So a lot of times we superimpose the model of our parents, both financially and religiously, on the life that we're trying to build now in our 20s.
Okay. Rabbi Moshe Tzvi, advice from parents and financial repercussions on parents.
Yes. I mean, I would say, Aleph, step 1 is don't assume anything. You're not really entitled to anything. I think we're a very entitled generation. People often make wrongful assumptions about what my parents have to do or should do, what I expect them to do. Very often, parents can sometimes provide a very comfortable life for a child, but can't necessarily support you beyond that. And very often, children don't know exactly what their parents have or don't have based on, despite the fact that they grew up a certain way. So I would say, as a starting point, don't go into it with the expectation that someone has to provide for you. I think if you're old enough to get married, you should be prepared to take the full weight of that responsibility on your own shoulders. Parents who can help and can do so graciously, it's a wonderful thing. It's a big bracha, but it's certainly not a given. The other thing I'll just add is that very often I find that in conversations with students, they don't really have a plan. And sometimes the parents, more than anything, before they want to talk about helping their children out, and sometimes they can help out, they want to know that you're actually thinking about it. So I'll give you just a classic scenario that comes up in terms of guys who want to continue learning beyond their college years. Someone comes to me, I'm dating seriously, I'm thinking about going for smicha, my parents are freaking out. Is it that your parents are anti-smicha, or are your parents anti your naivete? Meaning, do you know how this works? Do you know how much life costs? Do you have any sense of how much a Rebbe is going to make? Is it sustainable? Is it realistic? Do you understand that you may have to work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet? Do you appreciate that? Are you prepared to do that? And I find that very often when we approach our parents, those who are in the dating process, with a sense of understanding, a little bit of a financial understanding of how life works, of how the world works, with a little bit of a sense of what I'm prepared to do in order to make this happen, I think sometimes it's a very different conversation with parents, even for parents who are able to support and able to financially assist. So, again, educate yourself, whether it's getting the basic financial education that I totally agree with is sorely lacking. I was, in my personal life, very late to the game. I looked to Rav Dovid as a mentor, and he has lots of good books to recommend for those
But he doesn't have any Netilat Yadayim thing, so I don't know.
Yet.
He used Bergenfield as an example. He's actually from Teaneck. I'm from Bergenfield, but we'll leave that for now. But educate yourself and learn, again, as was said earlier, learn how to have a conversation with your parents. Don't make your parents the enemy. Yes, your parents at times will have a different hashkafa or a different approach to things, but seek their worldly advice. People who are older than you have more knowledge of the world and just a basic understanding of how life goes, and don't run away from that. Run towards that.
Yeah, and they've known you for a lot longer than maybe the person, the mentor, the Rav, the mashgiach. Rachel,
I was going to say also the mentor or the Rav who's giving that advice. I mean, whoever you marry, whoever's giving you advice, they're not the one who's going home with that person after the wedding. You are. So it's very easy for someone on the outside to give you advice, but ultimately it's your choice. So it's important for people to remember that. But in terms of the parental piece, I mean, I think a lot of this ties into identity in general, where people feel a pressure of trying to figure out who they are when they're 20 years old. And I think in our communities, we do a lot of that in terms of shidduch dating, that we can sum up people in these very surface things. And a lot of it's fabricated anyway. because that's what you're supposed to say. I always say, like, a Sayu at Sinai profile is who someone is during Aseret Smei Tshuva, really. But it's like aspirational, because I don't even know if that's who they are. But, and again, I always say priorities are values in action. So in other words, we can have the same values, but those values may not actually show up on a day-to-day basis as priorities. So I think just in terms of parents, I think it ties into a larger conversation, but I think in terms of people understanding that we might think we have it all figured out, but we're going to continue to learn more about ourselves. This authenticity thing that people are very into right now, which I think is a problem because it makes people feel like if there's anything in their life where there's any dissonance or any tension about, it's like, oh, then like I can't continue doing that. When in reality, we're very complex people and we're constantly wrestling with things and we're figuring things out. So kind of normalizing the messiness of this process, as opposed to, I had clarity, I figured out what I'm gonna do, and then I did it, and I just knew, which also that piece. When people ask married couples, when did you know? I think it's a silly question, because there are plenty of people that have dated people and they knew, and they didn't marry them or it didn't work out later on. And I think even if they knew at a certain point, that's not what's keeping them married 15 years later. So even this obsession with like, how did you know? There's always a lot more to this couple's story than what they're gonna share. Yeah. So even that concept of like, who are we getting advice from? Where are we getting that from? And do we have permission to kind of ask ourselves, is that me?
Yeah. And sometimes like hashkafic things for people, I've noticed in questions that have been brought in my office where it'll be, but he wears this, but she listens to this kind of music, and that will be the cause of a breakup.
Yeah, I mean, he wears jeans when he builds the sukkah once a year. I mean, come on,
right.
Like he's, you know,
so,
but it's bein hazmanim, but he's wearing
right.
jeans.
In other words, those, like sometimes the virtue signals, sometimes about halacha, but sometimes it's a certain virtue signaling that's not necessarily true to who you are, but it's true to who you are at this moment in the context in which you're in. So I want to change the focus for a second to think a little bit about some of the mental health crises for people during the dating years. Self-questions, insecurities, inadequacies, particularly for those people who are dating a lot, not finding that person. Senior year is rolling around and feeling like, oh, here there's so many people, isn't there someone for me? What are your recommendations for people who are in that place of deep sort of personal doubt? Rabbi Moshe Tzvi, can I start?
I'm going to pass to Rachel. This is a mental health question, and
okay.
I'll be honest. It should start
I
with
was
Rachel.
going to pass it back to you. But, I mean, I think part of this is on the community and the way we talk about dating and trying to set people up. I think one expression I'm not a fan of is telling people, go out with them, you have nothing to lose. Because it's not true. Every time you go on a date with someone, you are not just investing time. I think people get very makpid on bittul zman only when it's dating. They'll be like, I wasted 2 hours of my time, you know, because we never waste 2 hours doing anything stupid, but for date. But it's more than that. We are investing our emotions, and rejection hurts, and it hurts for men also. There's this thing like, oh, you always ask the guy first because if, you know, the guy says yes and then the girl says no, but it's fine because, you know, guys have these bulletproof egos, and if he gets rejected, he's going to be fine, which I think there's misunderstandings between men and women. I think women don't realize, imagine if every time you went shopping, before you even walked into the store, you had to pay $100. Before you even walked into the store to look at the clothes, you had to pay at the door. That's what guys have every time I mean, not every date is $100, but I think there are things that people don't realize, and both sides are like, oh, well, like, we have it so much worse. But there's, I think, some misunderstandings or people not understanding certain kind of bigger picture things. But in terms of mental health piece, dating brings up every rejection in terms of every insecurity we've ever had about ourselves. Sometimes we get direct feedback about what the issue is. I think it's very silly when we say, oh, yeah, no, it's nothing personal. It's nothing personal. They just spent time with you, and they don't want to continue dating you, but it shouldn't be personal.
Yeah,
it is.
It's
no,
personal.
So they think you're great. They just don't think they're going to marry you. But it's just silly when we kind of downplay that. So I think a few things. I think, first of all, people recognizing what is your dating mental health. Do you come back from a date and right away you're processing with your friends and you're calling everyone on your committee and the shadchan, and what I find to be problematic about that is none of those people are actually on the date with you. So if there was something that didn't feel 100% right, I'm not even saying from a abuse perspective, but just something that like really might be a conflict. If I find almost any of those things, when you talk to a college teacher or your Rebbe, they can easily smooth it over for you, but they weren't on the date. They weren't able to sense that thing that you might have sensed. So I think people recognizing when you come back from a date, I would say take a time out for a half hour. Don't talk to anyone about the date when you come back. Give yourself a half hour, go for a run. I don't know, but before you're in the noise of like, oh my God, where'd you go, man? Like just, give yourself some space. And I think even just understanding that we cannot build emotional compatibility or assess emotional compatibility when we have messengers having the hard conversations for us. So if we are trying to build emotional compatibility with this potential partner, but we have the shadchan talking to the other person's aunt to work out some of these things, how are we able to gauge kind of where this relationship can go? So I would encourage people to, think about that piece of, on the one hand, we want to turn to others when we need help and, if we feel like we don't know what to do. But I also think that there are couples who are getting married who all of a sudden get married and are like, oh shoot, like, can I just text you what I'm feeling right now? Because like we haven't had normal open conversations where we're vulnerable. So that I think is a big piece of limiting also what are things you're going to talk about through text versus in person versus FaceTime. This thing of getting to know each other through text messaging that's not how you get to know someone. Anyone could be witty, great, so your emojis have chemistry. Okay. Your phones will get married, awesome. But like that has to be in person. We need to have more of this kind of, when we're in person, how do I feel? What are we talking about? I'm going to stop talking because I know they have great ideas also. But I think just in general, the role of technology and also people understanding that this feeling of if I don't do this thing right now, like this is like the last opportunity of my entire life, which sometimes shadchans will build things up like that. It's like, okay, let's calm down. And it's also okay when you're not totally sure about things. This idea that you just know and that just like carries you forever, I think is just not the reality for most people.
Okay, thank you. Dovid.
I think three things as it relates to mental health. Number one, it should be said just very clearly, it's go to therapy, have a therapist. I had 2 different therapists when I was in my 20s and I was dating. One I am still in touch with, and when I have a child, the first person I text outside of my immediate family, and if it's a boy, the Moel, is this therapist. I really owe a great deal to her, and you shouldn't be embarrassed. Go see a therapist. Find somebody that works. It's hard. Finding a therapist is a little bit like dating, so it might compound a little bit of the stress, but you'll find somebody. How's the first session?
You're not feeling it.
One and done. Either way, definitely therapy I think is really, really important. Number 2, I use an analogy, imagery from a movie. I've quoted it many, many times, from a movie called Castaway that stars Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is lost on this island. He's by himself. It's like this island of loneliness. And he has to figure out how he gets off. He was in a FedEx plane and all the packages are sealed. So he starts opening up all the packages. There's one package as a FedEx driver that he remains sealed. Why does he not open up all the packages? Some packages he finds ice skates. Some packages he finds tools. The last package he never opens. Why? Because the last package for him gave him a purpose to get off of the island. It gave him something that can be intact, that is going to continue even afterwards. And I look at that both religiously and identity formation. There are a lot of packages and commitments that are going to fray and unfold and erode during your time on the island of loneliness, looking to get married and find community and kind of enter into this next stage in your life. Have a package that remains intact. I don't want to make any suggestions for what that package could be. The package can be your professional life. The package can be your relationship to Shabbos. The package can be your relationship to davening. The package could be starting a Word doc that you're going to continue your learning, for 25 minutes at a time that you find is an exciting project. But give yourself a purpose outside of dating that you're going to be able to take through out of it. That doesn't just focus you on the process of dating itself. And the last thing, and I quote this story over and over again, and I'm sure people who have ever heard me talk about dating assume that the story is coming, and it is. And that is having rachmanas, having basic compassion on yourself and your own development. And just because you are not the same person religiously that you are at 19 years old, and you look at your seminary teachers or yeshiva teachers with a sense of embarrassment that you don't have the obvious signals that once demarcated you as a great product of this place, and you're starting to, a lot of the packages unfold and erode over time. Have rachmanas on yourself. It doesn't mean that you're not a good person. It doesn't mean that you're not, your best religious years are not ahead of you as they always should be, which is part of the reason why seminaries and yeshivas warp us, that they think it was always behind us. Your religious could always be ahead of you. And the story that I always mention is when Rabbi Moshe Weinberg called me up, and he mentioned to me a girl, and he said she's unbelievable, and he was going on and on about her Yira Shemayim and her Midos. I said, Rebbe, I am not there anymore. I had to be very honest with him. I'm not there anymore. It's not what I'm looking for. You're describing somebody that's like all the way up here, and I'm here. And his answer was very beautiful, and it sources from the Sefer of the Rokeach. Reb Tzadok mentions it as well. Reb Moshe Weinberger looked at me. He was on the phone. He said, Ein chasidus ke chasidus rishona. There's no chasidus. Your first chasidus, that's something special. But there's a chasidus shniya and shlishis and revius. There are going to be other ways that you evolve religiously. And using dating as a preservative to stay intact your early 20s is not healthy. Things evolve, things get different, and to not walk around the rest of your life thinking that you are a shell of a person that you could have been because you didn't get married while you were in Stern and YU is not healthy, it's not true, and it undermines the basic dignity and compassion that all of us have, both in our religious lives and in our futures.
So I love when a student comes to me and says, I started dating and it opened up a lot of packages. And I want to explore that now. I think one of the gifts of dating, and it takes a person to not lock in and say, like, now the light switch is on, I'm officially dating, and I'm not allowed to shut that switch off. I love when a student turns that switch on, starts dating, and uncovers a lot of stuff. And comes and says, is it okay for me to shut the switch and deal with that? And I said, yeah, that's like actually one of the big brachos that comes through this process. Meaning, in terms of the mental health exploration, the exploration of self, a lot of stuff comes out through the dating process. And if a person, engages that as opposed to just burying that and ignoring that, if you say like, whoa, this really brought me into a greater clarity and awareness of myself, and I pause to explore that, I think it's a tremendous gift. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes I didn't realize those things were going on in my mind or in my heart until I started opening up that sugya of dating. But it's a bracha. Don't shy away from it. Like Dovid said, like Rachel said, there's people who want to help you, and don't be afraid to get that help.
Yeah, in fact, this is a good time to pause and mention our own counseling services, which are free to students. I spoke with counseling. In fact, one of the head of counseling was unable to come tonight, but was intending to. And yes, hello. How are you? I met Martin. I was trying, but thank you. Dr. Muscat is here, and I'm sure happy to speak with anyone here afterwards. We have our own dating mechanism here. YU Connects, who's also unable to be here tonight with us, but for those people who are interested in pursuing that. I want to close by saying that in his last major work, Morality, Rabbi Sacks devoted a very significant portion of it to happiness and to loneliness. He was very concerned about the declining marriage rate, and that people were no longer seeing marriage as the ultimate expression of a covenantal relationship by which we build community and which we raise the next generation. And so I think in his tribute, it's a tribute to him, that we're having this conversation through the Sacks-Herenstein Center tonight. I want to thank our panelists. Our commitment was to make sure that we finished before Night Seder, but we got a little bit of a late start, and I didn't want to cheat anyone out of the precious wisdom that the three of you have offered us tonight. If I may ask you to stay for a few moments in case people have questions of a sensitive nature, and you know how to reach myself and reach our panelists, and just rapid fire, but it's not what time you wake up and what time you go to bed. Just like one sentence closing thought as we end this conversation. Rachel.
Oh, I'm not prepared.
You're going to kill me for this, but I really mean it. I'm very proud of the dating series that we did on 1840. It was a 5-part series. I'm meaning this without any sense of irony. I generally don't plug 1840 that much in my class. I don't. My class students know that. I don't plug it that much in class.
Not
it's
that
a great
much.
series that has voices from actual people who are dating, particularly Hannah Cohen. If you listen to anything 1840, that's a great series to start at.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll just end by saying we're here for you, exactly where I started. There's so many resources between the Rebbeim, the faculty, the counseling center, the mashgichim. There are so many people who want to talk to you, and don't try to be heroic and say, I got this. That's not heroic, that's foolish. Open yourself up to the conversations, and Yirtzeh Hashem, everyone will have a lot of success.
Rachel?
I would just say that I think sometimes we look at anxiety and fear as something that our goal is to eliminate it, and I think a lot of this is about learning how to engage with it and kind of be with our feelings, as opposed to running to find things to alleviate anything about ourselves, whether it's dating, whether it's career choices. I think part of living life is that we experience feelings on a regular basis. So there's, that's part of the human experience. And I think learning how to be with ourselves and understanding ourselves better, not just for the sake of dating, but even just for your own relationship with yourself. In terms of, if you're a tourist within your own self, it's very hard to be a tour guide when you meet someone else and you want to show them around in terms of who you are as a person. So just, looking at it in that way, that yes, this is an awesome time to learn about yourself, and there are things that you're not going to know until you're in a relationship. This is way more than one sentence, but
it's a run-on sentence, but it's
very
okay.
long.
We're not in English
I'm
class.
a run-on sentence person, but it's okay if you don't have your life figured out today. There are a lot of adults who don't have their lives figured out. So really just to kind of take things day by day and to try to be gentle.
Enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
For those of you who would like to continue learning with us tomorrow night, Dr. Shira Weiss and I will be doing a virtual session on Rabbi Sacks' insights on the Haggadah. We have about 500 people registered, so please feel free to join us. Have your parents join us. Wishing each of you a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Thank you so much.